Hello and welcome to New People, New Ways, a podcast in partnership with Fresh Expressions Florida and Fresh Expressions United Methodist that explores new ways of being church through the stories and insights of scholars and practitioners alike. I'm Piper Ramsey Sumner, a layperson and cultivator of Fresh Expressions on the Florida Conference team.
And I'm Michael Beck. I'm the director of Fresh Expressions UM and Fresh Expressions Florida. And our guest today is the Reverend Dr. Michael Moynagh. He's been at the forefront of missional innovation throughout his career as a minister and a scholar in the Church of England. His expertise is in practical theology and contextual ministry, and that's played a vital part in shaping the Fresh Expressions movement. And as we know it today, Mike has been involved in the creation of that. He's also an associate tutor of Wycliffe Hall, a Church of England training college at Oxford University. And he's the author of nearly 20 books. And Mike doesn't know this fully, but every year to go into a new year, I pick a mentor, someone living or dead, and I try to read every book that they've written in that year. So this year was E. Stanley Jones. That was a lot. That was 40 books. But yeah, but Mike Moynagh was my mentor. Oh, this was 6-7 years ago, and I tried to read. And his books are not small, y'all. They are big, fat, thick books. In fact, we call it the Moynagh hazing ritual at the Fresh Expression House. Everybody has to read these textbooks on missional ecclesiology. So, and then I got to track Mike down like a stalker in Oxford and go over there across the pond and meet with him. And he's been not just a mentor through his writing, but a mentor physically and relationally ever since. And he's been all across our conference and our denomination. And so it's just a real joy to have you with us today, Mike.
Thank you, Michael. It's just great to join you and also Piper. And I've really enjoyed all the stuff that we've done together. And I hope there's going to be lots more.
So the first question that we always like to ask our guests is, who is Mike Moynagh? We don't ask Michael, all the guests who you are. We ask them that about themselves. So
I think Michael's told you quite a lot, but just a few other gaps. I'm a Church of England minister. I led a church in the early 1990s. I've been researching and studying Fresh Expressions for the last 20 years of my life. I live here in Oxford. I'm married. We've got 2 children, both of whom are married, and 5 grandchildren.
Yes, and Liz is amazing, by the way.
She certainly is. She certainly is.
The better half there, for sure.
She is, Michael, but don't say that too loudly.
So how did you find yourself part of this whole Fresh Expressions thing?
Well, when I was leading my church down in southwest England, I used to run these little groups, which I used to call Just Looking groups, every term. They were kind of precursors to Alpha before Alpha was on the scene. So there were exploratory groups. People would, every term, I'd start one. And folks would join, and we'd have sort of 18 people or so on the group. They'd begin to explore Jesus. And then after a term, I'd float them off as little home groups. So the small ongoing study groups. So we just multiplied these groups over several years. But what I observed was that inside these groups, there were some people who were already quite well connected to the church, and they'd start coming on Sunday. But there were other people who weren't really connected with the church at all. And they came regularly to the group, but they'd never come to church on Sunday. And so towards my end of my time in Taunton, I began to ask myself, well, why are we even trying to get them to come to church? Why don't we just set up a separate congregation for them? And I began to look at pubs and began to think, but in those days, I was still in the Sunday mentality. And I thought to myself, I can't do this. I've got 3 congregations on Sunday morning anyway. If I have to have a 4th, then I just won't be able to get to one of these congregations. It's not going to work. So it was a bit me-centered. I kept thinking, the minister's got to be there. It's got to be Sunday morning. And that really prevented us doing anything. And I just abandoned the idea, and then it was time for me to leave anyway. So that was one of my ways into this. There was a second way. I was involved in a project looking at the future of people's lives in the UK. And a colleague and I, we would do work with companies and government departments, helping them with their long-term planning. And as part of our work in the late 90s, we were looking at consumerism. And in those days, a big trend in the UK and in Europe, it had already become well advanced in the United States, but was this trend toward customization, towards personalization. And one morning I woke up and I thought to myself, it's amazing. Every organization is trying to personalize its products to the customers it's trying to reach. The only one that is the church. And basically, we're offering these bog standard services every Sunday morning where we want everyone to come, whatever their background. And this can never work, especially in the world that's emerging. And so I wrote a little book about this called Changing World, Changing Church, which became, for a couple of years, a real bestseller. It just poured off the shelf. And then it was completely banished from the shelves by this much better book by Frost and Hirsch called The Shaping of Things to Come. And that completely superseded my book. And for 20 years, I've harbored this great resentment because I'd have been a millionaire if it hadn't been for that book. But I think I've more or less got over it by now. But it was a much better book. It was much better. But these two things came together in my mind, my own experience in the parish, plus this realization that we had to have, as it were, bespoke congregations for different cultural groups. And I drew a little picture in that book. What would life be like in 2020 if we had bespoke church? And we're closer to it than I would ever have dreamed, although we still have a long, long way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a follow-up question on that, because you're the one who taught me, that every church, just by its nature, is inaccessible in some ways, right? Like anytime you decide to meet in a specific time, specific place, and do worship in a specific way, that's accessible for some, but it becomes inaccessible. So as you were describing, I actually have those 3 different congregations and was trying to funnel these people back into that kind of thing. But then you realize maybe these things need to be distinct kind of bodies. So tell our listeners, how do you hold that together in tension or creative tension with like creating those kind of communities that meet people where they are, that fit those kind of distinctions and preferences, but keeping the whole thing kind of in relationship and connected? Do you have any?
Yeah, I think this is really important. First of all, it is so important that people understand that every congregation by its nature is exclusive because of when, where, how, and why it meets. And, we worship an inclusive God, so we can't tolerate worshiping God in an exclusive way. And I keep saying to people, there is only one solution to the exclusive nature of our congregations, and that is to start new congregations with and among people who find the existing church to be inaccessible, and to do that in a way that connects with them. So you meet at a time, in a place, with an agenda and with a style that connects with those particular people. And that inevitably means that you're going to end up with more and more, we pray, diverse and very different congregations. And that's great. Actually, in the New Testament times, you had these little home churches meeting in people's homes. But the scholars think that in Antioch, for example, the synagogues were in all different parts of the city, and the churches, as sort of descendants of the synagogues, if you like, they would have been in many different parts of the city too, and they were all ethnically different and socially different, and so they were, like our new congregations, all distinct according to the cultural group that you're seeking to reach. And so what they did and the way they solved that problem, how do you have unity and diversity? That's basically the question. You've got these very diverse congregations. How do you hold them all together? And the thing that they did was to meet regularly. We know that because in Galatians, when Paul talks about the confrontation he had with Peter, he said, I confronted Peter in front of them all, which means that these little house churches all met together. We know they did that in Corinth. We know they did that in Jerusalem. They met in the temple courts to begin with. So there was a meeting of all these little congregations together at various stages, whether it was weekly or monthly or however often, we don't know, but they all came together. So what we need to do in our local churches is to do exactly the same. We'll do it differently, but we'll follow the same principle. And so the picture I would have is that you just imagine a wheel, and at the hub is the parent congregation. And then round the rim are all these new little congregations beginning to emerge. You need to make sure these congregations are connected to each other around the rim, and you need to connect them to the hub, so like the spokes of a wheel. And so these connections might take the form of social events, they might be outreach events, there might be occasional times when you come together for a big celebration, when you're all together to celebrate Christmas or celebrate Easter. They may be in the form of carol services or whatever. But from time to time, you bring everyone together. And the thing I want to end with is to say you start at the very beginning. So let me give you an example, all right? When I was in Florida, someone said to me, we've got, I think it was a minister, said, we've got this dinner church with people who are out of work. And he said, my problem is that my congregation, my main congregation, don't own this. They say, well, what's this to do with us? They're not contributing anything to the church. They're not making any contribution. So what I want to say is, look, if you start a dinner church, once it's settled down and people are coming regularly, you've got your church notices. You probably send them out by email, print them, put them on the tables where everyone meets to eat together. Make sure that the dinner church is listed as one of your church activities through the week. Now watch what happens. Most people will ignore these notices and you just have to throw them away. But when someone's going up to get a cup of coffee or something or collect some food, maybe the persons who they've been talking to, they start looking at that notice sheet. And they begin to register that they're part of something bigger. And month after month, they do that. And then someone comes to you as a leader and said, look, I've been looking at this notice sheet. I see you're forming a choir for the carol service. Can I join? Someone else comes along and says, hey, I notice you're looking for a bookkeeper to help your treasurer. Well, I'll tell you what, I used to do that. I could do it with my eyes closed. Do you want me to help? And so these people start volunteering for the wider church, even before they think of themselves as churchgoers, even before they wear that Christian label. They are starting to connect, and that'll help them on their own spiritual journey toward Christ. But it also means that the habit of connection is forming right from day one. So if you are wanting to start a new Christian community, like a dinner church or cafe church or whatever, and you're part of a local church, then give people your notice sheets from a very early stage so as to help them to see that they're part of something whole.
Good.
I love that. I love what you said early on, how you build community for and with the people that you're serving. And that's one of my favorite things about Fresh Expressions is that it's building community, and it's not just we're going to go into this community and do it all ourselves and lead it all ourselves and tell them how it goes and then leave. It's building community alongside people, and those people become members and become a part of forming it because it's their community. Of course, they should be a vital part in shaping how it looks. So I love that so much.
Piper, this is really important actually, because a lot of church planting has been quite imperialistic. We go into your terrain and we plot down our version of church, and then we invite you to come to it. This is old-fashioned colonialism. I mean, I come from a former colonial power, so I know about this. So, no, it's not that. It's with and among people. And the thing I want to say to folks, I mean, here in the UK, I don't know whether it's the same with you, but so many churches are saying, thanks to the coronavirus, we've lost our volunteers. And often pioneers are saying, we've lost our volunteers. People inside the church are no longer volunteering. I want to say, if you're doing Fresh Expressions and starting a new Christian community and you can't find volunteers within your congregation, then this is the moment of a lifetime, the opportunity of a lifetime, because you can find volunteers among people outside your church. And so you start building a team. One or two of you are Christians, two or three of you may not be churchgoers. You build a team with them, and this is the way that you do church with other people. So I think we should see there's lots of volunteers as a fantastic spirit-given opportunity to stop doing new church for other people and to start doing new church with other people right from day one, because they become our volunteers. This means, of course, that forming a team will take longer than traditionally it's taken, but the greater length may lead to greater depth in what you're doing.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Greater length leads to greater depth. Got to write that one down for sure. It's the long game with Fresh Expressions. Sometimes you get really lucky and it explodes and you've got this amazing thing going, but sometimes it is about taking years to let something grow. And I think we have to change our definition of what success looks like. So if it looks like big numbers, Fresh Expressions is not the movement you want to be a part of. But if it's about impacting individual lives, then I think Fresh Expressions is amazing at that.
Absolutely. And if you think of, one of the ways I like to think about what we're doing is we're kind of offering the church as a gift to people. Now, you give your most precious gift to people who are closest to you. So, I mean, you wouldn't give your prized sort of family heirloom to someone who you hardly know. You give a gift that's appropriate to the person, to the relationship that you have with that person. And so when we when we offer the church to people, what we're offering is communal life with Jesus, and that is the heart of the church's life. We're offering the thing that is most precious. Now, you can't do that if you don't know the person very well. The relationship is too thin to bear the weight of the gift that you're offering. You have to offer a less precious gift at the beginning, build the trust, you exchange gifts all the time. You give a gift, they give a gift back, you're exchanging gifts. And as those gifts become more valuable, then you can go on and begin to offer what is more valuable to you until you get to the point where you can offer the most precious gift of all, which is communal life with Jesus. So this building of this relationship to the point where it's got, it's thick enough to bear the weight of that gift, that might take a long, long time. I mean, you might do it really quickly, and sometimes it happens like that, but it might actually take a long, long time. So that this time is not being wasted if you're exchanging gifts with one another and building those relationships. It's not wasted time. So don't feel, oh my gosh, I haven't got to the stage where we offer church yet. Oh, this is awful. No, you're offering lots of other gifts. We talk about the missional journey. You offered the gift of listening to the people first. You found organized ways of loving them. You're building community with them. All this is gifts being exchanged. And then at the right time, when the relationship can bear the weight, then you offer the gift of communal life with Jesus. And in all this, we're just remembering what Jesus said, about not throwing pearls before swine. That was a rather brutal way of saying, don't give your most precious gift until the relationship can bear the weight of it. So it's not a bad thing to be spending time.
Yeah, let me jump in there, Mike, because I know you got a book coming out in process, The Ecclesiology of Gift. I want to circle back to that and hear more about it and how our listeners can connect with it. But something you said, I think, so, Piper, an edge pioneer, what we call adventure over here now, lay person, but also leading a whole system, right? A whole denomination. For me, the inherited church pastor guy who's got to, do attendance. I got reports right now, just before Christmas, we have the annual church reports, right? And one, yeah, one of the struggles that I hear from pastors a lot is the metrics of success that Piper mentioned. They're like stuck in the 1950s, where it's all about butts and bucks, nickels and noses, and that still is how the institution measures success. So pastors feel like I've got to put my time, my energy, what resource we have into trying to hit those metrics, right? Even though in most cases, some of them are pretty irrelevant. And I mean, like baptisms, that's always going to be a relevant metric, right? It means we're connecting with new people, professions of faith. But a lot of them were really designed for this Christendom, very attractional only kind of church. So do you have thoughts or suggestion or wisdom around, what does this look like? What are some metrics that would actually measure this kind of thing? That might help us actually see what fruitfulness looks like in the 21st century.
Yeah, I think there are two ways of doing this. Where I am working in one of the dioceses of the Church of England, we have a very simple matrix to begin with, and that is how many teams have moved how far round the missional journey. So how many teams have moved from focusing mainly on listening, to focusing mainly on organized love, to focusing mainly on community, to focusing mainly on sharing Jesus, to focusing now on this becoming an expression of church, a real worshiping community. And then how many move to repeating the process. So that's a really very simple way of measuring, as it were, fruitfulness in that sense. And we use language like potential fresh expressions for all those who haven't got to the church stage, and then we talk about actual fresh expressions for those who got to the church stage. And that just clarifies, because really, if you haven't got to the church stage and you're not sharing Jesus, then what you're doing is absolutely brilliant for the kingdom, but it's no different to all the other many community projects that we've led and have got in our churches. We've had luncheon clubs, we've had, cafes and all sorts of things, bereavement groups for years and years and years. And these, these new Christian communities that we call them fresh expressions, unless they're actually sharing Jesus, unless you've got a dinner church that's sharing Jesus, it's no different to all the other luncheon clubs that we've had for centuries. So we find it helpful not to extend the language uncritically, but rather to be discriminating and say, look, there are potential fresh expressions here, and there's some actual ones. Then secondly, in the UK during the lockdown, we developed a survey called the Fruitfulness Framework Survey. I didn't do this myself, but colleagues in the Church of England did. And if you Google Fruitfulness Framework Church of England, you'll get to it. And what that did was, what the surveyors, the company did, research company, was they went to, I think it was 200 people in roughly 20 fresh expressions of church. Most of them were Christians, as it happened, but you could do this with others. Great majority were Christians. And they said to them, they asked them 25 questions which measure different aspects of spiritual growth. So it measures your relationship with God, with other people, with other Christians, with the world outside, and also with yourself. So, for example, they asked the question, when you joined your Fresh Expression, were you praying regularly? And 45% said yes. Then they said, now, at the time of our survey, which could be 3 or 4 or 5 years later since you joined the Fresh Expression, now are you praying regularly? And 65% said yes. Now, all the measurements were really positive for discipleship. And what you can do is you can take this fruitfulness framework. We're just about to go to a second round, and we're calling now for another 100 people who will take part in this. You can go and you can do your Fresh Expression, and you can give this. You could just play around with the questions, make it appropriate for people who don't go to church. You could give them the questions, and most of them are pretty inoffensive, and say, just fill in those questionnaires, and let's now do 3 things with them. One, you just think about your replies. And what does that make you think? Does it make you long for more? What do you think? Secondly, let's talk about them in our community, and let's use this as a basis for discussion. The dinner church, let's talk about that, our tables. How do we get on? And you could give people the aggregate results for the whole of your dinner church and say, let's just talk about those aggregate results. So that's the second thing you do. And then the third thing you can do is to give that survey to people in your congregation on Sunday and say, when I arrived as a pastor, were you praying regularly? Now, 5 years later, are you praying regularly? And then compare those results in your congregation with the results for the Christians who are involved in leading a Fresh Expression. Now, I think you'll find that for the Christians who are leading the Fresh Expression, the growth in their spiritual fruitfulness, whether it's in relation to God, relation to the world, relation to other Christians, how they think about themselves, I think you'll find that the growth is far more dramatic for those who are leading Fresh Expressions than for those in the main congregation. Certainly when I saw the results and thought back to my time in the parish in the early 90s, I thought nothing that we did in the parish in terms of prayer meetings, in terms of preaching, in terms of whatever it was that we were trying to do, small groups, nothing would have had the results that we saw in those 200 people, mainly Christians, who answered that survey just at the end of lockdown. So that's what I'd encourage you to do. And that's a much more sophisticated way of measuring fruitfulness, because people might not be declaring themselves, I've become a Christian. They might not yet be saying we are church, but they might all have grown in the way that they think positively about other people, they think positively about themselves, how they relate to others, and so on. So you can have a more nuanced way of measuring your fruitfulness through that kind of survey. As I say, just go to Fruitfulness Framework, Church of England. You'll find the report. You'll look at the back and see the questions, and then you just adapt the questions for your own particular community.
That's good. Love it. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So you and Michael and Michael here, you both wrote a book together called The 21st Century Christian, Following Jesus Where Life Happens. So can you tell me about...
I've got a copy here.
There it is. So who is that book written for, and how can it be useful for the average Christian who is passionate about reaching those outside their church?
Well, and Fresh Expressions US published it, and they published it really well. It's in pocket size. It's got pretty pictures in it. It's massively easy to read. The paragraphs are really short. The chapters are short. Michael Beck made sure that it was, had some good American, examples in it. So it's not just British. It's got lots and lots of stories, fantastic stories. So if you are someone who's just vaguely interested in Fresh Expressions, you could read that book, and I think it would tell you all you need to know in your head to do and develop a fresh expression. It tells you how to start, develops how you grow them. You've got great ideas for how you share Jesus. You know, you get to this stage in this missional journey. You know, we've listened, we've loved people, we're loving them now, we're building community with them. How on earth do we share Jesus? Well, it's got great, very simple ways of doing that. So it basically tells you all you need to know, and you can read it. I don't know, Michael, do you think a couple of hours max? Probably, you know, 2.5 hours, depends how quickly you read. And you probably wouldn't want to read the last couple of chapters anyway, because they're a bit specialist for the church leaders. So, you know, it really is. So that's the first thing I'd say. And then the second thing I'd say is, if you're a church leader, I'll tell you what I would do. I'll first of all look at that book, see if I like it. And then I would start having one-to-one conversations with people in the congregation, and everyone I talk to, I'd give this book to. And then better still, I would start preaching through the book. And as I preach through it, I'd give everyone in the congregation, if you can afford it, a copy of the book so they can be reading it. And if you want to preach through this, Michael's done a great sermon outlines, 6 sermon outlines. So you can take the sermon outlines, completely change them and adapt them or whatever. But at least you've got a starting point for preparing your 6 sermons. Preach through the book. And then if I was leading a church, I'd be saying to folks, want you in the congregation, if you want to form small groups and discuss this book for 6 weeks. And again, Michael's produced some great discussion outlines for people to use, so they can use that in the group, small discussion outlines. We're going to be producing, I think, some more videos to use. So you've got the material there for discussion. So as a church leader, I'll be preaching about it. I'll be getting folks to read the book, to discuss it in small groups. And then I'll be saying, now, at the end of all that, I'm going to be bringing people together who want to explore this further. And I would just start meeting with them as a church leader, meeting with them, encouraging them to form a team, go and start a fresh expression in a section of their life. And this group, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't know how many teams you'd have, but they support each other. You can exercise pastoral oversight and support with them and for them. You can learn from them as a church. They can learn from you. And so they can begin to make a journey together at their own pace and their own ways to start these fresh expressions. Michael did something like that, but that was before this book, with the people in his church in Florida. They ended up at one stage, they've probably got more now, but they had 15 of these different communities, all doing different things, dog walkers and other walkers. And Michael was sitting down with gang leaders and teaching them how to do legit entrepreneurship and so on. So, you can have a whole multitude of these different communities. So that's what I would do. I just, be ambitious, for goodness sake. America, you Americans, you're supposed to be the sort of center of what ambition. Everything's got to be bigger and better. Well, great, harness that. If you're a pastor, be ambitious for your church. Turn it inside out. So instead of looking inward, everyone is looking outward, but they're not doing it on their own. They're doing it in groups. So turn them inside out so that they're in little groups supporting one another as they start these new little Christian communities in a walk of their life, and get them really excited about this. And this book can be the sort of vehicle that will help you do that and get people on their way.
Yeah, I just actually in the past couple of weeks have had several churches reach out about our book, and I think we're going into like a second edition, right?
Oh, brilliant! Great.
We're second edition, so.
Right. Well,
yeah.
Well, I've always had the vision for this book, but it will be a book that churches use in bulk. I get it for all your church leaders. If you can get it for every member of the congregation, preach through it, that's fantastic. Or for all the small group leaders. But for goodness sake, get it in their hands. We're going to be doing some new videos, so you show them the videos. Talk about it, preach about it, get them together to chat. Most important thing, get folks into teams where, as a team, in 2 or 3, they start a little community in a cafe, a walking group, a dog walking group. Michael's got a group. They walk their dogs together, and they talk about one of the stories about Jesus just before they go and do that. Do it online. We've got groups. You've got them in the US. We've got them in the UK, where I've got a friend. He brings young people together. They sit together in a community hall. They sit on bean bags. They bring their laptops and their iPads. They all play Minecraft together. And then they talk together about spiritual themes. So they're talking about their broken relationships and their anger. And he might start talking, my friend will start talking to them about forgiveness. And then he'll say to them, hey, folks, how do you model forgiveness in Minecraft? And he said to me, this is Anglican language. He said, Mike, doing worship and liturgy is so easy in Minecraft. You just ask the young people, how do we model a confession? And they come up with ideas. We're going to blow something up. This is God forgiving our sins and obliterating all the mess in our lives, And so you create around Minecraft this little Christian community. They're playing Minecraft together, but they're also enjoying one another's company. They're eating together and so on. But then they're also translating some of the spiritual truths they're discussing into Minecraft. You can do the same with Lego. Know someone in one of our dioceses, and he started Lego Church. And families come, he tells them a Bible story. They then go model that story in Lego. If you meet once a month in an all-age community, then every Tuesday evening, you can do one of two things. You can either bring families together, tell them a Bible story, and get them to make Lego models by Zoom, and then they come and show those Lego models by Zoom. And so this is so easy, it just takes you probably 3/4 of an hour. Or you do something even simpler. You say, you've got your monthly all-age meeting, and then you're going to say, every Tuesday evening, we have 1/4 of an hour family Bible story. And people come together 6:30, 7 o'clock, or whatever time before the kids go to bed. You tell or read them a Bible story, 5 minutes. You then invite topics for prayer. You say a prayer. That is 10 minutes, only 10 minutes. I mean, why bother to lead an all-age community once a month when for just 10 minutes every Tuesday, you can be bringing the community together so that you deepen those relationships. All you've got to do is 10 minutes in a Tuesday evening, and you can start transforming that community from a monthly community, someone forgets to come, so it's actually every other month, into something which is meeting every week. This is gold, and it's so simple, and you just do it by Zoom.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. I saw the Lego thing too. So here's a question for you. You wrote a book 20 years before, kind of envisioning the future, what things would look like 2020, right? And eerily, uncannily, kind of that looks really similar to that vision. So look forward 20 years from now, 2040, 2050. What is the future of Christianity? What do you see for the church?
So I'm thinking back to around the year, 1800 in Britain, when the established church, the Church of England, was really pretty poor. It had fallen on hard times. The clergy were of low quality. Some of them were very cynical. And kind of a lot of people were really quite despondent about the church. And what they missed were all the new communities that were springing up thanks to the Wesleyan revival. And those new communities then became the sort of seedbed of the evangelical revival, which then had its counterpart in the more Anglo-Catholic end of the church in Britain. And the revival of the church and all the massive strength of the church in the mid-19th century was completely unexpected, as it were, around 1800. Now, I think we could be in something similar. In the UK, particularly in Europe, the church is really falling on hard times. And it could be that we are seeing the birth of something new, a new form of church. And it's being born through love. It's being born through organized love. Christians coming together, listening to their context, listening to God, finding organized way of loving people around them, building community with them, and then sharing the gospel in very simple ways and encouraging new forms of church to emerge in the midst of people's everyday lives. Now, this is a new look church. I believe we could be seeing this beginning to emerge. And so in 20 years' time, my picture would be that we have organized forms of love multiplying, that the church is so weak that Christians have to do this with people who are outside the church. So it's really collaborative with them. And alongside these organized forms of love are very simple expressions of spirituality. So just imagine, you've got a luncheon club, you've got senior citizens there, they're all meeting for lunch in a sort of cafe style. And then you say to them, hey, folks, if you want to stay behind, we're going to gather around the table here. We're going to light a candle. We're going to play a little bit of Christian music. I'm going to read a passage from scripture or spiritual writing. We'll have then a few minutes of headspace. You can pray to God if you understand God or a higher power, or just have positive thoughts for people around you and situations in the world. And then at the end, I'm going to say a short prayer. And you can imagine that, you've got a luncheon club of 20 people and perhaps 10 people gather around that table. And they come back week by week. And after a while, someone says to you, can we talk about these readings? I've got views. I don't understand them. I've got questions. And so you begin to extend the time to 25 minutes. What have you got? You've got people coming for the purpose of worship. You've got worship in music. You've got a Bible reading. You've got a sermon in the form of a discussion. You've got prayer. Hey, folks, you've got a little congregation emerging. Now, I think we as a church have something brilliant to offer. We can offer organized love, absolutely, but other organizations offer that. But we can also offer organized love with spirituality attached. And I believe that's a winning combination, not least because the attached spirituality is spirituality centered on Jesus, inspired by the Holy Spirit. And I think that's unbeatable. So if we build spirituality around our love, then I think that opens the door for the Holy Spirit to do what only the Spirit can do. So I think this is what the future of the church could look like. Lots of bits of organized love, spirituality alongside them, little new congregations emerging, these congregations connecting together and connecting to a small parent congregation, and all beginning to grow together so that we see in 20 years' time the seeds starting to emerge of the church's revival. That's the future I think we could see, and that's the future I'm certainly praying for.
Amen.
It makes me think about the theology of Fresh Expressions, because many people think of you as the leading theologian of Fresh Expressions, and so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, the theological kind of like basis for why Fresh Expressions, and then also what makes Fresh Expressions church and what makes church. The kind of, maybe that's too big of a question, but I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Oh, Piper, I mean, the first thing I should say is theology always emerges from a community. It's either an implicit or explicit community. So you shouldn't think of me as a sort of theologian, as if I'm sitting on my own. There's a whole community. And basically, I always say to people, all I've done is just to nick everyone else's great ideas and put them together. So I think one of the theological distinctive features of Fresh Expressions is it's about church emerging in people's everyday lives. Now, that actually used to be what the church was. When the church was the village church in Europe at the center of the community, it was in people's everyday lives. The church building was a place where the community would gather at and have all sorts of mystery plays and other events. It was a place where the business meetings used to take place in the church porch, and contracts were signed. The church was right there in the middle of people's everyday lives, work lives, and family lives, their social lives. Holidays consisted of holy days. They were festivals, all based around the saints that the church celebrated. So the church was right at the center of everyday life. And then, of course, what happened was with the Industrial Revolution, life became more complex, work and home separated off, and the church remained centered in the domestic arena of life, in the residential part of life. And increasingly, not only did you have work, but then you had all the consumer and the leisure activities spinning out from the mid-19th century onwards, and the church became disconnected from all these new segments of life. And so you had church in one segment of life, leisure, home, rather, domesticity, if you like, residential, but you had all these new leisure activities, these new networks, the workplace and so on, and church wasn't present there. And so what Fresh Expressions are saying is church can be present in all these different arenas of everyday life, whether you're a photography group or a walking group, whether you coach a sports team, whatever it is you do, film, you love films, whatever it is, whatever your passion is, church can emerge as part of that passion as you share it with other people. And the theology that supports that is that Jesus is Lord of all. There is no part of the world today where Jesus cannot be present. He can't be Lord of all. If you say this bit of life is so awful, he can't be present there. Remember, when Jesus was on earth, he went to the prostitutes and the lepers and all those who were excluded by the existing society. He was there among them. So there is no section of today's world that Jesus cannot be present in. You can form church with and among prostitutes. You can form church with and among drug dealers. There is no section of life where church cannot be present. And we know that this is the case, A, because Jesus is Lord of all now, and B, because when he returns, we're told in Ephesians that when Christ returns, he will fill, or it could be translated complete, all things. All things will be filled with Jesus. In Corinthians 15, God will be in all. God will be God in all things. So when we take the church into everyday life, all we're doing is anticipating this time when Jesus returns and fills or completes every dimension of life. We're anticipating that. And that, I believe, is part of the distinctive theology that Fresh Expressions offer. And in the language that I would use, we offer the gift of communal life with Jesus in the context of everyday life. There is no section of life where Christ cannot be a gift and where communal life with him cannot be a gift. That is, I think, the distinctive theology of Fresh Expressions of Church. And I can tell you, already it's happening. Younger people say this is common sense. Younger members of our congregation say this is obvious. I talk as if this is new, but for them, this is obvious. So in 20 years' time, this theology is going to be very old theology. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Mike, as you say that, I'm just thinking of, so we do this thing called Living Room Church VR Monday nights. And one of the things I say when we open is, Jesus is Lord of the metaverse. And now I guess we could say in the Fediverse too, but that even in that digitally built environment where we're gathering together to do life and have a sermonic conversation and a Jesus story and ask those framing questions, Jesus' presence and life is there with us in that. And this really cool development now, we've got younger people that are much more, sharp and astute technologically than some of us in the group. And they've started creating these worlds. So like we gather in the living room and then we go to Genesis 1 in the beginning, and it's like a universe with a light, and we get around that. We can go to the split sea in Exodus, and we can see that. We could talk about the story from there. So for one, I'm thinking that is going to continue to unfold and evolve in ways that probably we don't even see right now. But this idea of fresh expressions, that communal life with Jesus can form in every space and every dimension of life, is certainly, that applies to the digital world too.
Absolutely. And I think the future is hybrid, really. There will be some exclusively digital churches, I'm sure, for various reasons. But I think it is hybrid, you see, because you could be doing that. You can do that either when you're all sitting together, and you've had a meal together, and then you break into these different metaverse worlds, if you like. You can do that. Or you can be doing, you've met together face to face in person, but then you can do it online between your in-person meetings, and again you can enter these different worlds. So I think it's fantastic, and it just, as you say, has the potential to bring all sorts of new understandings and new ways of expressing our life together in Jesus. And so it's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, this is going to be so exciting. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, tell us, what can we look to in the future coming from you? What projects are you working on? And how can people just connect with you in general, connect with what you're doing?
So I'm not great on, having waxed eloquently about online. I have a Facebook page which I never, ever go to. So don't even begin to connect with me through that, because I'll never pick up the message. Although I do get this stream of messages which are basically Michael Beck doing this and Michael Beck doing something else. But anyway, I have to clear out all my junk mail all the time. But and likewise, don't get to me through LinkedIn. But actually, if you want to connect with me, then go to either Piper or Michael and ask for my email address, and then just come to me and email me. All right. And, if I can help, I'd be thrilled to do that. But I continue to write. I'm writing this book on giving the church, which aims to bring the idea of giving the church into the center of church doctrine and into the center of mission, and to give new language to the idea of church planting. So this is what I'm working on now. We also have a book which I've just rewritten called Godson, which we're publishing a revised version, a rather better version in the UK, and we'll publish it in the US. We're developing a dedicated website with each chapter will have an animation, a sort of podcast, video cast interview, and some video stories. And we're doing that for the UK, but I'm hoping, Michael, we need to talk about the equivalent in the US. So as an adjunct to the book, because I think people will use the book, and it's great. It's like the 21st century Christian book. It's got pictures and it's really easy to read, but it's very much a how-to-do book built around the missional journey. So, there are chapters for each stage of the missional journey. So, but really, the visual content is going to be more important than that. So we need to talk about that. So I'm involved with that. I'm also involved working with various denominations and dioceses in the Church of England and outside on rolling out these learning communities, bringing teams together into God-sent hubs. Some people call them that. We call them in Church of England greenhouses, where teams come together and do that planning together and support each other and keep moving forward and get coaching and so on, and use the God-sent material. So I'm involved with that as well.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much Mike, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Every time I get to talk to you, it's like I get this refreshed and renewed and so energetic and excited. This is really great.
Well, bless you, Piper. It's great. I love seeing you again. Long time since we talked. So let's have a catch up sometime. And Michael, great seeing you. And both of you we're doing this just for Christmas. So both of you have a great Christmas.
Thank you.
Fantastic. All those of you who are watching, thank you for watching and bearing with us. And forgive my English accent. And I just hope you find it helpful anyway.
No, the English accent is a bonus.
We love it.
Yeah, nice.
I'm not sure. Anyway, God bless. Take care, both of you.
Thank you. And to those listening, thank you so much for joining along with this episode of New People, New Ways. If you enjoyed our conversation with Mike Moynagh, please rate, review, and subscribe on whatever platform that you're listening through. And if you'd like to learn more about Fresh Expressions, you can check out our website, freshexpressionsfl.org. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And we will see you next time on New People, New Ways.